possible. Just a handful of folks can organize, write, and moderate with a mostly unbiased way the entirety of human knowledge. I mean, so if there's something like the approach that Wikipedia took possible for LLMs, that's really exciting.
Well,
you think that's possible?
And in fact, Wikipedia today is still not deterministically correct, right? So you cannot take to the bank, right, every single thing on every single page, but it is probabilistically correct, right? And specifically, the way I describe Wikipedia to people, it is more likely that Wikipedia is right than any other source you're going to find.
Yeah,
it's this old question, right? Of like, okay, like, are we looking for perfection? Are we looking for something that asymptotically approaches perfection? Are we looking for something that's just better than the alternatives? And Wikipedia, right, has exactly your point, has proven to be like overwhelmingly better than people thought. And I think that's where this ends. And then underneath all this is the fundamental question of where you started, which is, okay, what is truth? Mm-hmm. How do we get to truth? How do we know what truth is? And we live in an era in which an awful lot of people are very confident that they know what the truth is. And I don't really buy into that. And I think the history of the last, 2,000 years or 4,000 years of human civilization is actually getting to the truth is actually a very difficult thing to do.
Are we getting closer? If we look at the arc of human history, are we getting closer to the truth?
I don't know.
Okay. Is it possible that we're getting very far away from the truth because of the internet, because of how rapidly you can create narratives, and just as the entirety of a society just move like crowds in a hysterical way along those narratives that don't have a necessary grounding in whatever the truth is?
Sure, but we came up with communism before the internet somehow, right? Which was, I would say, had rather larger issues than anything we're dealing with today.
It had, in the way it was implemented, it had issues.
And its theoretical structure, it had real issues. It had a very deep fundamental misunderstanding of human nature and economics.
Yeah, but those folks sure were very confident it was the right way.
They were extremely confident. And my point is, they were very confident 3,900 years into what we would presume to be evolution towards the truth.
Yeah.
And so my assessment is number one, there's no need for there's no need for the Hegelian dialectic to actually converge towards the truth. Mm-hmm. Apparently not.
So why are we so obsessed with there being one truth? Is it possible there's just going to be multiple truths, like little communities that believe certain things? And
I think it's just, number one, I think it's just really difficult. Like who gets, historically, who gets to decide what the truth is? It's either the king or the priest, right? And so we don't live in an era anymore of kings or priests dictating it to us. And so we're kind of on our own. And so my typical thing is we just need a huge amount of humility. And we need to be very suspicious of people who claim that they have the capital truth. And then we need to have, look, the good news is the Enlightenment has bequeathed us with a set of techniques to be able to presumably get closer to truth through the scientific method and rationality and observation and experimentation and hypothesis. And, we need to continue to embrace those even when they give us answers we don't like.
Sure, but the internet and technology has enabled us to generate a large number of content that data that the scientific process allows us sort of damages the hope laden within the scientific process. Because if you just have a bunch of people saying facts on the internet, and some of them are going to be LLMs, how is anything testable at all, especially that involves human nature, things like this? So it's not physics.
Here's a question a friend of mine just asked me on this topic. So suppose you had LLMs in equivalent of GPT-4 or even 5, 6, 7, 8. Suppose you had them in the 1600s.
Yeah.
And Galileo comes up for trial.
Yeah.
Right. And you ask the LLM, is Galileo right?
Yeah.
What does it answer? Right. And one theory is it answers no, that he's wrong, because the overwhelming majority of human thought up until that point was that he was wrong. And so therefore that's what's in the training data.
Yep.
Another way of thinking about it is, well, a sufficiently advanced LLM will have evolved the ability to actually check the math, right? And will actually say, no, you may not want to hear it, but he's right.
Yeah.
Now, if, the church at that time was, owned the LLM, they would have given it human feedback to prohibit it from answering that question. Yeah. Right. And so I like to take it out of our current context because that makes it very clear. Those same questions apply today. Right. This is exactly the point of a huge amount of the human feedback training that's actually happening with these LLMs today. This is a huge debate that's happening about whether open source, AI should be legal.
Well, the actual mechanism of doing the human RL with human feedback seems like such a fundamental and fascinating question. How do you select the humans?
Exactly.
Yeah, how do you select the humans?
AI alignment, right? Which everybody like is like, oh, that sounds great. Alignment with what? Human values. Whose human values?
Whose human
right.
values?
And so we're in this mode of like social and popular discourse where like, there's, you see this. What do you think of when you read a story in the press right now and they say, XYZ made a baseless claim about some topic, right? Mm-hmm. And there's one group of people who are like, aha, they're doing fact checking. There's another group of people that are like, every time the press says that, it's now a tick, and that means that they're lying, right? Like, so, like we're in this social context where there's the level to which a lot of people in positions of power have become very, very certain that they're in a position to determine the truth for the entire population is like, there's like some bubble that has formed around that idea, and at least it flies completely in the face of everything I was ever trained about science and about reason. And strikes me as like, deeply offensive and incorrect.
What would you say about the state of journalism just on that topic today? Are we in a temporary kind of, are we experiencing a temporary problem in terms of the incentives, in terms of the business model, all that kind of stuff? Or is this like a decline of traditional journalism as we know it?
You have to always think about the counterfactual in these things, which is like, okay, because these questions, right, this question heads towards is like, okay, the impact of social media and the undermining of truth and all this. But then you want to ask the question of like, okay, what if we had the modern media environment, including cable news and including social media and Twitter and everything else in 1939 or 1941, right, or 1910 or 1865 or 1850 or 1776, mm-hmm. right? And like, I think
you just introduced like 5 thought experiments at once and broke my head. But yes. Yeah. There's a lot of interesting years in
Kennedy. Like Kennedy, I just take a simple example. Kennedy, like how would President Kennedy have been interpreted with what we know now about all the things Kennedy was up to? Mm-hmm. Like how would he have been experienced by the body politic with a social media context? Right? Like how would LBJ have been experienced? By the way, how would like many FDR, like the New Deal, the Great Depression?
I wonder where Twitter would think about Churchill and Hitler and Stalin.
I mean, look, to this day, there are lots of very interesting real questions around like how America, got, basically involved in World War II and who did what when and the operations of British intelligence on American soil and did FDR this, that, Pearl Harbor,
Yeah.
Woodrow Wilson ran for, his candidacy was run on an anti-war. He ran on the platform of not getting involved in World War I. Somehow that switched, like. And I'm not even making a value judgment on any of these things. I'm just saying, like, the way that our ancestors experienced reality was, of course, mediated through centralized top-down control at that point. If you ran those realities again with the media environment we have today, the reality would be experienced very, very differently. And then, of course, that intermediation would cause the feedback loops to change, and then reality would obviously play out.
You think it'd be very different?
Yeah, it has to be. It has to be just because it's all so. I mean, just look at what's happening today. I mean, the most obvious thing is just the collapse. And here's another opportunity to argue that this is not the internet causing this, by the way. Here's a big thing happening today, which is Gallup does this thing every year where they poll for trust in institutions mm-hmm. In America, and they do it across all the different everything from the military to the clergy and big business and the media and so forth, right? Mm-hmm. And basically, there's been a systemic collapse in trust in institutions in mm-hmm. the U.S. almost without exception, basically since essentially the early 1970s. There's 2 ways of looking at that, which is, oh my God, we've lost this old world in which we could trust institutions, and that was so much better because like that should be the way the world runs. The other way of looking at it is we just know a lot more now, and the great mystery is why those numbers aren't all 0.
Yeah.
Right, because like now we know so much about how these things operate, and like they're not that impressive.
And also why do we don't have better institutions and better leaders then?
Yeah, and so this goes to the thing, which is like, okay, had we had the media environment of that we've